What if I told you that Prince William actually called the police after something utterly shocking was discovered inside Queen Camilla's wardrobe? This isn't just a rumour or some wild internet theory. This is a story that has already set the world ablaze with speculation, questions and suspicions about the very heart of the royal family. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping mystery, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. By subscribing, you'll always stay ahead of the curve when it comes to these royal bombshells, hidden secrets, and the truths that the palace would rather keep locked behind closed doors. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next, because today's revelation is going to leave you speechless. So let's start with the title itself. William called the police on Camilla after this was discovered in her wardrobe. That headline isn't exaggeration. That's exactly what happened, at least according to accounts from inside Clarence house. During what was supposed to be an ordinary inspection of the property, a check of the structure, the fittings, the safety of the building, inspectors stumbled upon something that instantly turned routine into extraordinary. Behind one of the walls adjoining Camilla's private dressing area, they uncovered a hidden passage. At the end of that narrow corridor, tucked away in darkness and dust, was a sealed chest that had clearly been placed there with great care. And here's where it gets truly unsettling. That chest wasn't some centuries-old artefact, dating back to long-forgotten monarchs. No, it was relatively recent, marked with insignia that directly tied it to Elizabeth II, and lined in such a way that it was clear whoever stored it intended to preserve its contents for decades. Think about that for a moment. A chest connected to the late Queen Elizabeth, concealed directly behind the walls of Camilla's bedroom. It doesn't take a detective to realise why William reacted the way he did. This wasn't some curiosity. This was a discovery that screamed deliberate concealment. And when something like that is discovered in such a sensitive and private place, it becomes impossible not to wonder what was inside, why was it hidden, and most importantly, who was responsible for putting it there? Now we have to pause here and remember that Clarence House itself carries immense historical weight. This isn't just another residence. For generations, it has been a home for royals who played central roles in the monarchy's continuity. During World War II, rumours swirled about secret passages and reinforced areas hidden within the walls of London's royal residences. Clarence House was whispered to contain such mysteries. Hidden rooms, escape routes, and secret spaces only a handful of people were ever aware of. For inspectors to stumble upon one of these passages in the 21st century is already significant enough. But to then find that chest, locked away and unmistakably tied to the late Queen, adds an entirely different layer of gravity. The chest itself appeared to hold documents, papers stacked and preserved with careful lining, protected from dampness and time. It wasn't jewels glittering in the dark. It wasn't some lost crown or priceless relic from centuries past. No, this was something far more intriguing. Written material. Letters, ledgers, possibly even private records that someone desperately wanted to hide. And that someone had access not only to Clarence House, but specifically to Camilla's own quarters. The implications of that alone are staggering. As word of this filtered through the palace's inner circle, panic set in. Advisors whispered furiously about what the chest might contain. Could it be records of jewels that had vanished from the ledgers years ago? Archivists had long noted gaps in the accounting of certain heirlooms, some tied to Princess Diana, others to Elizabeth II herself. Could these documents be proof that someone had hidden away treasures meant for safekeeping? Or worse, treasures that had been deliberately taken out of circulation? No one knew for sure, but the suspicion alone was enough to cause alarm. This is where Prince William stepped forward. Unlike others who were frozen by fear of what a scandal might do to the monarchy, William insisted that the situation couldn't simply be brushed aside. He reportedly told those closest to him that this was not about violating Camilla's privacy or prying into her personal effects. This was about legacy, about truth, about protecting the memory of his grandmother, and ensuring that nothing sacred to her reign was lost to shadows. That conviction led him to do what no one expected. He called the police. Imagine that moment for a second. The future king bypassing the carefully polished machinery of royal advisors, choosing instead to bring in outside authorities. It was a bold move, one that signalled how serious he believed the matter to be. By involving the police, William wasn't just making a statement about the chest. He was sending a message to everyone in the royal household. This was not a secret that would stay buried. This was going to be addressed openly and transparently, no matter whose feathers it ruffled. For Camilla, the discovery could not have come at a worse time. Sources suggest she denied any knowledge of the chest, dismissing it as something that must have predated her use of the room. But the defensive edge to her denial raised eyebrows. If she truly had nothing to do with it, why had the chest been hidden in such close proximity to her private space? Why not in a cellar, an attic, or some disused storage area? The optics were terrible. And in the world of royalty, optics are often as damning as facts. The moment news of the discovery leaked to the outside world, the situation exploded. What should have remained a tightly guarded palace secret instead spilled into headlines across the globe. Within hours, hashtags like #CamillaChest and #RoyalSecrets began trending. Memes flooded social media, with users posting mock images of hidden passages and treasure chests tucked inside wardrobes. But beneath the humour was real intrigue. People wanted to know what was inside that chest, and why was Camilla at the centre of the storm? This was no longer a quiet matter of family dispute. It had become a story that symbolised something larger. Secrecy versus transparency, shadow versus light, concealment versus truth. And William, by taking the bold step of calling in the police, positioned himself firmly on the side of truth. That single act made him appear to many as the defender of his grandmother's legacy, the one royal willing to put everything on the line to protect what the monarchy is supposed to represent. Meanwhile, Camilla found herself painted in an entirely different light. One of suspicion, secrecy, and shadows. And this is only the beginning. What was inside the chest? Why did William feel he had no choice but to escalate the matter? And how has this discovery already started reshaping the public perception of both William and Camilla? The answers to those questions would unfold in the days that followed, leading to fallout no one in the palace could have prepared for.
When Prince William made the extraordinary decision to involve the police over the chest discovered in Camilla's wardrobe, the atmosphere inside Clarence House shifted overnight from unease to outright crisis. What had begun as a routine inspection of the residence now spiraled into one of the most sensational discoveries in modern royal history. Before I take you deeper into what happened next, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have notifications turned on. Stories like this one evolve quickly, and every update brings shocking new twists you won't want to miss. Subscribing ensures you never fall behind on the revelations that keep shaking the palace walls. The first issue was containment. Advisors rushed to control the situation, stressing the need for discretion. They argued that if the police handled the chest too publicly, it would spark immediate media frenzy. But what those advisors failed to realize was that the spark had already been lit. Word of the discovery was slipping through the cracks, whispered among staffers and shared in hushed conversations between insiders. Secrets rarely stay sealed within palace walls, and this was no ordinary secret. The chest had become a living symbol of questions the monarchy had never wanted asked. What else might be hidden? What else might be unaccounted for? And why did this discovery point so uncomfortably close to Queen Camilla herself? The police, once called in by William, approached with the caution and gravity such a case demanded. They treated Clarence House as both a historical site and an active scene of inquiry. Officers carefully documented the wardrobe, the hidden passage, and the chest itself. Witnesses later described the surreal image of uniformed police in the heart of Clarence House, quietly photographing a corridor no one had known existed. For a residence so often presented as polished, dignified, and serene, the intrusion of law enforcement shattered the illusion. Behind those walls, there was dust, darkness, and mystery, and William wanted answers. Camilla, meanwhile, was said to be deeply unsettled. She denied knowledge of the chest, repeating her insistence that it must have been hidden long before she occupied the room. Yet her reaction betrayed tension. At public events shortly after the story broke internally, she appeared distracted, unsettled, her usual composure noticeably fraying. Observers described her expressions as strained, even defensive. In the world of royalty, body language can often speak louder than carefully chosen words, and in Camilla's case, it only fueled suspicion that she was concealing more than she admitted. The chest itself remained unopened in those first tense days, as debates raged over whether the police should immediately unseal it or whether palace archivists should be brought in first to catalogue whatever it might contain. For William, the delay was intolerable. He had pressed for immediate action, arguing that every hour of hesitation only worsened the optics and gave the appearance of a cover-up. He was right. By the time the decision was finally made to proceed, leaks had already reached the press, and the headlines exploded. Newspapers seized on the story with a fervour rarely seen since the most turbulent days of royal scandal. "Secret chest found in Camilla's wardrobe," blared one tabloid. "Police called to Clarence House after shocking discovery," read another. Broadcasters scrambled for airtime, social media erupted, and within hours the hashtags #CamillaChest and #RoyalSecrets were trending worldwide. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok filled with speculation, memes, and theories. Some users joked about Narnia-like wardrobes hiding entire worlds, while others speculated about missing jewels, confidential letters, or even hidden diaries. What united them all was a sense that this was no minor incident, it was a turning point. The narrative forming around William and Camilla was sharp and polarizing. William was portrayed as the protector, the one who had finally taken a stand for transparency and for the legacy of Elizabeth II. His decisive action in calling the police made him look principled, fearless, and unwilling to allow shadows to linger over his grandmother's memory. By contrast, Camilla's role was cast in an entirely different light. Whether fairly or unfairly, she became the figure of suspicion, the one tied by proximity to the hidden chest, the one whose denials did little to erase doubt. For the public, perception is everything, and perception had already turned against her. Behind the scenes, King Charles faced his own torment. Sources close to the palace whispered that he dreaded what might be inside the chest. He feared not only the potential scandal but also the personal humiliation of seeing his wife entangled in such a controversy. Charles, ever cautious, reportedly urged restraint, hoping to handle the matter quietly, perhaps even internally. But William's boldness had already made that impossible. The die was cast. This was no longer a private family issue. It was a matter of public trust. Archivists brought in to examine the situation added fuel to the fire. They pointed out that there had long been discrepancies in royal ledgers, records of heirlooms, jewels, and private correspondence that didn't quite add up. Some items linked to Diana were missing, others tied to Elizabeth II had been noted as unaccounted for. Could the chest contain answers to those discrepancies? Was this the missing link in decades of whispered questions about treasures that had simply vanished? If so, its discovery could either clear names or permanently taint them. Meanwhile, the public devoured every detail with insatiable hunger. Royal watchers dissected every image of Camilla, every expression, every gesture. Videos analyzing her recent appearances racked up millions of views, while comment sections filled with speculation that bordered on obsession. For many, Camilla became the embodiment of secrecy, the keeper of shadows. William, conversely, became the light, the one who dared to pierce through the darkness, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be. The impact went beyond entertainment. This was about trust, about the institution itself, about the idea that the monarchy might still hold hidden caches of secrets waiting to surface. And if one chest could be discovered behind Camilla's wardrobe, how many others might exist in other royal residences? Were there more passages, more concealed rooms, more chests lined with documents or treasures too sensitive to ever be revealed? The discovery cracked open not just a wall, but the entire aura of certainty surrounding royal history. For Camilla personally, the fallout was brutal. Her approval ratings plummeted, protests greeted her appearances, and the strain began to show in her increasingly withdrawn public presence. Advisors began cancelling events to avoid scenes that might spiral into embarrassment. Retreating to Ray Mill House, she attempted to find refuge from the storm, but her absence only fueled further speculation. If she had nothing to hide, critics asked, why retreat? Why not face the storm head-on? At the same time, William's public standing surged. He was hailed as the royal willing to act decisively, the one who would not allow secrecy to corrode the family's legacy. For him, the chest was not merely a mystery, it was a line in the sand. And in standing on the side of transparency, he redefined how the public saw him. In their eyes, he was no longer simply the heir, waiting for his turn. He was already stepping into the role of protector, of guardian of the monarchy's future. And yet, despite all this drama, one question towered above them all. What exactly was inside the chest? Rumors swirled, missing jewels, handwritten letters, perhaps even confessions meant never to be seen. The truth, when it finally came to light, would either vindicate William's boldness or confirm the darkest suspicions surrounding Camilla. That revelation was coming, but in the meantime, the discovery itself had already altered the balance of power, trust, and perception within the royal family. The chest had become more than an object. It was now a symbol of secrets kept, of truths demanded, and of the tension between shadow and transparency that defines the monarchy itself. The moment of truth finally arrived. After days of tense debate, endless speculation, and mounting public pressure, the sealed chest discovered in Queen Camilla's wardrobe was at last opened. It was a scene that those present will never forget. Uniformed officers, palace archivists, and carefully chosen witnesses gathered in a stark, private room inside Clarence House. The chest sat in the center, its surface dusted with the residue of decades, its lock resistant until pried open with deliberate care. And when the lid creaked upward, the secrets that had been hidden in the darkness for so long spilled into the light. But before I reveal what was found, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The revelations inside the chest are so astonishing that they deserve to be heard in full detail, and you'll want to stay with us through every twist in this story. Subscribing means you won't miss a single update as this incredible saga unfolds. Inside the chest lay carefully arranged stacks of documents, bundles of letters wrapped with twine, and folders sealed in protective coverings. There were no glittering diamonds or radiant tiaras, at least not in that moment. What was visible was paper, hundreds of sheets, perhaps thousands, neatly preserved and organized with unnerving precision. To the untrained eye, it might have seemed mundane. But to the archivists and police officers present, the weight of what they were handling was immediately clear. These weren't random scraps. These were records, ledgers, and private correspondences tied directly to the late Queen Elizabeth II. The insignia marked across the folders confirmed what had only been guessed until then. This chest had not been placed there by chance. It had been deliberately stored to protect, or perhaps to conceal, some of the monarchy's most sensitive material. Letters bearing the Queen's insignia, notes marked confidential, and documents tracking heirlooms long thought missing were among the first items catalogued. To some, it was like opening a time capsule. To others, it was like uncovering a vault of incriminating evidence. The most shocking discovery came in the form of discrepancies in jewel records. Archivists had long whispered about certain missing pieces, heirlooms that vanished from ledgers without explanation, including items once associated with both Elizabeth II and Princess Diana. Here, inside Camilla's wardrobe wall, were documents that hinted at those very gaps. Not only were lists of jewels included, but notes in the margins suggested movements, transfers, and even abrupt removals from the royal collection. Whether these notes were the Queen's personal reminders or someone else's annotations remained unclear, but their existence alone was staggering. Among the bundles of letters, speculation grew that some were deeply personal, possibly exchanges between Elizabeth II and close confidants, perhaps even written reflections never meant to be seen beyond her lifetime. For William, these letters were sacred. They were a connection to his grandmother, a woman whose reign defined an era and whose memory he fiercely sought to protect. For Camilla, however, their presence behind her wardrobe wall was nothing short of catastrophic. As the contents of the chest began to leak, inevitably, into the press, the world reacted with a mix of fascination and fury. Reports described the discovery as everything from a hidden archive to the monarchy's Pandora's box. The idea that sensitive royal documents, potentially including records of missing heirlooms, had been tucked away in such a secretive location was almost too sensational to believe. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. The chest was real. The papers were real, and their implications were enormous. Camilla's denials rang louder, but they were drowned out by the roar of public opinion. How could she possibly have been unaware of such a chest hidden behind her own wardrobe wall? Even if she truly had no hand in its concealment, the optics were disastrous. Critics painted her as the custodian of shadows, the one under whose roof the secrets of the monarchy had been buried. It didn't matter whether she was guilty or innocent. The perception was enough to corrode her standing almost overnight. For William, however, this was vindication. By calling in the police and insisting on transparency, he positioned himself as the guardian of the royal legacy. To the public, it appeared as though he had fought not just for the memory of his grandmother, but for the principle that truth must prevail over secrecy. His reputation soared. Media outlets praised his resolve, framing him as the modern face of the monarchy, one willing to act decisively, even at the risk of igniting scandal. The palace itself, however, was thrown into turmoil. Advisors scrambled to contain the damage, working around the clock to craft statements that downplayed the discovery while simultaneously acknowledging the need for further review. But the truth was impossible to contain. Every new leak sparked fresh headlines, each one more sensational than the last. Online, theories multiplied. Some believed the chest held proof of missing royal jewels worth millions. Others speculated it contained letters revealing long-buried personal conflicts within the family. Whatever the case, The chest had already transformed from a hidden artifact into a global symbol of secrecy. Meanwhile, protests outside royal events began to intensify. Demonstrators held signs demanding transparency, some mocking Camilla with slogans about wardrobe secrets and hidden treasures. Public confidence in her collapsed, and her appearances became fraught with tension. Advisors cancelled several of her scheduled outings, citing logistical challenges, but insiders admitted it was simply to shield her from humiliation. Every appearance risked confrontation, and every silence fueled suspicion. Ray Mill House, her private retreat, became her refuge. But the retreat only made matters worse. With Camilla largely absent from public life, speculation ran wild. What was she hiding? Why wouldn't she defend herself more directly? Why had the chest been placed in her quarters specifically, if she truly had no involvement? The more she withdrew, the more the narrative hardened. She was the keeper of shadows, while William was the beacon of light. The global impact was equally intense. International outlets ran round-the-clock coverage of the story, drawing parallels to other moments in royal history when secrecy had unraveled into scandal. The monarchy's reputation, already fragile, took another hit. For many, the chest symbolized everything they feared about the institution, that behind the grandeur and pageantry lurked hidden truths, waiting to explode into the open. Inside the palace, the divide between William and Camilla became undeniable. Though Charles desperately tried to hold the line, his efforts looked weak compared to William's bold action. The public had already chosen sides, and in their eyes, William's decision to call in the police was the defining act of courage in the saga. Camilla, by contrast, seemed diminished, her role under a cloud of suspicion she couldn't dispel. But one fact loomed over everything. The chest had been opened, its contents partially revealed, but not everything inside was made public. Authorities, archivists, and palace officials had access to the full trove, but the public did not. And that gap between what was known and what was withheld only deepened the sense of mystery. What else had been inside? What had not yet been revealed? And most importantly, what consequences would follow once the full truth inevitably came to light? Because as dramatic as the discovery was, this was not the end of the story. In many ways, it was only the beginning. The chest had been opened, yes, but the fallout was still unfolding, and the shadows it cast over the monarchy were growing darker by the day. The chest may have been opened, but the drama truly erupted when the news slipped beyond palace walls and exploded into the press. For the royal family, the discovery had been a private nightmare. For the world outside, it became an irresistible spectacle. Within hours of the first leak, the headlines were everywhere, each one more dramatic than the last. Camilla's wardrobe chest rocks the palace, declared one front page. William calls police over secret discovery, blared another. And just like that, the story was no longer confined to hushed conversations within Clarence House. It was a global sensation. Before we go further, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every day this story develops, and with each update, the stakes climb higher. If you want to be the first to hear about the twists and turns as they unfold, hitting that subscribe button ensures you're always up to date on the biggest royal revelations. The first wave of leaks described the discovery itself, the chest hidden behind Camilla's wardrobe wall, its ties to Queen Elizabeth II, and William's extraordinary decision to call in the police. But then came the more tantalizing details. Whispers that the chest contained sensitive documents, ledgers detailing missing heirlooms, and bundles of letters that could reframe the way the monarchy was remembered. These tidbits of information, whether accurate or exaggerated, spread like wildfire. And once the story hit social media, there was no controlling it. Hashtags like #CamillaChest, #WardrobeSecrets, and #RoyalRevelations trended worldwide. On TikTok, creators reenacted the moment the chest was discovered, some with dramatic music, others with over-the-top humor. Memes circulated of wardrobes leading to treasure rooms, and jokes comparing the chest to Pandora's box-filled Instagram feeds. Yet beneath the humor was a sharp undercurrent of suspicion. People weren't just laughing. They were demanding answers. What had been hidden? Why had it been hidden? And why was Camilla's name at the center of it all? For the press, this was the story of the decade. Reporters scrambled to uncover sources inside the palace, publishing piece after piece that painted an increasingly dire picture for Camilla. Every denial she issued seemed hollow compared to the growing body of evidence and speculation. Every event she attended was scrutinized, her body language dissected frame by frame. Was that nervous glance a sign of guilt? Did that strained smile betray knowledge she wasn't admitting? The narrative crystallized quickly into a battle between two figures, William and Camilla. William, who had acted decisively by involving the police, was celebrated as the defender of transparency, the one brave enough to challenge secrecy within the palace itself. Camilla, by contrast, became the figure of suspicion, cast as the keeper of shadows. It didn't matter that she insisted she knew nothing of the chest. The fact that it was discovered in her quarters was enough for the public to link her to it, fairly or not. The contrast between the two couldn't have been sharper. William's image surged. Commentators praised his courage, his willingness to protect the legacy of Elizabeth II, and his apparent determination to bring truth into the light. For many, this was the moment he stepped fully into the role of leader, not just heir. Camilla, meanwhile, saw her approval ratings collapse. Polls showed sharp declines in public trust, and protests outside her scheduled appearances grew more intense. Some carried signs accusing her of hoarding secrets. Others simply mocked her, waving cardboard chests and chanting slogans about hidden treasures. The palace tried desperately to regain control of the narrative, but every attempt backfired. Statements about ongoing reviews and respect for historical materials were dismissed as evasions. Silence only made the public more suspicious. And Charles, caught between his wife and his son, struggled to hold the family together. His reluctance to confront the issue head-on left him appearing weak, overshadowed by William's decisiveness and Camilla's growing unpopularity. Internationally, the fallout was massive. News outlets from Europe to Asia ran continuous coverage of the story, often framing it as the latest blow to the monarchy's credibility. Late-night hosts joked about Camilla's secret stash, while documentaries rushed into production, promising to uncover the real story behind the chest. For many viewers abroad, the discovery reinforced the idea that the royal family was not just an institution of tradition and pageantry, but also one of secrets and shadows. The chest itself took on a symbolic life of its own. It became more than just a piece of furniture hidden behind a wall. It was seen as a metaphor for the monarchy itself, an institution built on layers of mystery, concealment, and revelations waiting to be unearthed. The fact that it was linked so directly to Elizabeth II only intensified its power. For William, it was about preserving her legacy, ensuring that her memory wasn't clouded by whispers of missing heirlooms and hidden documents. For Camilla, it was a devastating association, her name now forever tied to a symbol of secrecy, whether she had anything to do with it or not. Theories about the chest's contents grew wilder with each passing day. Some speculated it contained private diaries written by Elizabeth II herself. Others insisted it held jewels meant for Diana, hidden away to avoid controversy. More conspiratorial voices claimed it contained evidence of betrayals or long-buried feuds within the family. The truth, that it held sensitive documents and records of heirlooms, was almost overshadowed by the sheer scale of imagination surrounding it. And in the digital age, imagination spreads as fast as fact, sometimes faster. The damage to Camilla was undeniable. Her public appearances became rarer, her speeches shorter, her presence more subdued. Every time she retreated, commentators declared it proof of guilt. Every time she appeared, critics pointed to her defensiveness. It was a no-win situation. Ray Mill House became her haven, but even there, paparazzi stalked the gates, eager for a glimpse of the embattled queen consort in exile. William, however, only grew stronger in the public eye. His resolve to involve the police was praised as bold, modern, and necessary. He was framed as the bridge between the monarchy's past and its future, the one willing to stand against secrecy and insist on accountability. For many, the chest had transformed him from heir into protector, someone already embodying the role of king in spirit, if not in title. The global fallout was relentless. Discussions erupted not just about the chest itself, but about what else might be hidden within the monarchy. Were there other secret caches in other royal residences? Could there be more chests, more documents, more hidden rooms waiting to be uncovered? The sense of mystery grew larger than the object itself, leaving the impression that this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. And yet, amid all the speculation and headlines, one truth remained constant. The chest had eroded trust in the monarchy. Even unopened, it would have cast suspicion. But opened and partially revealed, it became a symbol of everything the public feared: that secrets had been buried, that legacies had been manipulated, and that transparency was only being forced by William's intervention. The monarchy, long shielded by tradition and ceremony, now stood exposed in a way it hadn't for generations. The battle lines were drawn: William as the champion of transparency, Camilla as the symbol of secrecy, and Charles struggling in the middle, unable to reconcile the two. The chest had done more than reveal documents. It had redrawn the power dynamics within the royal family and reshaped the way the world saw them. But the fallout wasn't over. If anything, it was only intensifying. Because as dramatic as the leaks and the headlines had been, there was still more to come. More revelations, more consequences, and more shadows waiting to be pierced by light. The Clarence House chest was supposed to be a curiosity, a dusty relic tucked away behind a wardrobe wall. Instead, it became the trigger for one of the most profound crises the modern monarchy had ever faced. By the time the police finished their initial cataloguing, the narrative had already escaped the palace's control. The damage was done. The public no longer viewed the monarchy as an institution shrouded in mystique and tradition. They saw it as one cloaked in secrecy, cover-ups, and divisions. At the center of this storm stood Camilla. Her decline was not a dramatic fall in one instant, but a slow erosion, a steady unraveling in the court of public opinion. Day after day, headlines chipped away at her reputation. Photos of her leaving Ray Mill House were dissected for signs of stress, fear, or anger. Former friends and distant acquaintances came forward, recounting old stories that painted her in an unflattering light. Even when nothing new was uncovered, the repetition of her name alongside the words chest, secrets, and suspicion reinforced the association until it became inseparable. What made her plight worse was her own silence. Palace advisors begged her to speak out, to make a televised address where she could deny wrongdoing, assert her loyalty to the late Queen, and remind the nation of her years of service. But Camilla hesitated. To address the matter head-on felt beneath her dignity, and she believed that time would cool the fury. Instead, time magnified it. Every day of silence became another reason for the public to believe she had something to hide. Meanwhile, William's star only rose higher. In the wake of the discovery, he leaned into transparency, briefing aides, cooperating with the police, and making public appearances where he carefully but firmly expressed his commitment to protecting his grandmother's legacy. He never attacked Camilla directly, but the contrast was unavoidable. He was open, decisive, and steady. She was evasive, defensive, and withdrawn. Polls showed that trust in William had reached record highs, while support for Camilla plummeted to near record lows. The chest itself became the most potent symbol of all. It was more than wood, hinges, and parchment. To the public, it embodied decades of mistrust. It represented the monarchy's tendency to hoard its truths, to bury its scandals, to present a polished facade while concealing what lay behind closed doors. The fact that this chest had been hidden in Camilla's private space only deepened the sense of betrayal. It didn't matter that she hadn't built the wall around it, or that the chest had been sealed long before she became queen consort. Perception outweighed fact, and perception cast her as the villain. The monarchy, long accustomed to weathering storms, found itself in unfamiliar territory. Unlike past scandals, this was not about a single member's misbehavior. It wasn't about love affairs, lavish spending, or political gaffes. It was about legacy itself. If Queen Elizabeth II's memory could be tainted by the secrets unearthed from that chest, then no legacy was safe. And if William had to publicly intervene against his own stepmother to protect that legacy, it suggested that the monarchy's unity was a brittle illusion. Internationally, the story shifted from intrigue to indictment. Foreign press outlets began running op-eds questioning whether the British monarchy had a future at all. Documentaries aired across the Atlantic, framing Camilla as the latest in a long line of figures who destabilized the crown. The image of William, steady and principled, was juxtaposed with footage of Camilla avoiding cameras, hurrying past reporters, or peering grimly from the backseat of a car. The contrast was stark, and it hardened global opinion. Inside Britain, the mood was no less severe. Protests outside Clarence House and Buckingham Palace grew louder. Activist groups began linking the chest scandal to broader critiques of the monarchy's lack of transparency. Campaigns for a more accountable crown found new momentum. Even moderates, those who had once dismissed Republican arguments, began to ask difficult questions. If secrets like this could be buried within palace walls, what else was hidden? What did the monarchy truly stand for in an age of accountability? For Charles, the chest was a double blow. As king, he was supposed to safeguard the dignity of the institution. Instead, he found himself caught between his son and his wife, unable to protect either. His reluctance to act decisively left him appearing indecisive, a monarch overshadowed by the stronger presence of his heir. And in the eyes of the public, his defense of Camilla looked less like loyalty and more like weakness. The chest had not just undermined Camilla, it had exposed the limits of Charles's leadership. In the months that followed, Camilla's appearances became fewer. She retreated to Ray Mill for longer stretches, surrounded by a dwindling circle of allies. When she did appear at official functions, the reception was frosty at best. Applause was polite but thin. Crowds seemed quieter, more watchful. She had become, in many ways, a ghost within the institution, a queen consort in title but not in spirit, her authority and influence drained away by suspicion and silence. The legacy of the chest extended far beyond Camilla's personal decline. It reshaped the way the public engaged with the monarchy. No longer was it enough for the palace to issue bland assurances or vague denials. People wanted documents, proof, and transparency. The myth of mystique had been shattered. What remained was an institution forced into an era of scrutiny it had long resisted. For William, this was both a victory and a burden. The chest had elevated him as a figure of principle, but it had also set a precedent. He would forever be measured against the moment he chose to shine a light on secrecy. If he faltered in the future, if he was ever seen to hide the truth, the public would remember this crisis and judge him by the standard he himself had set. And for Camilla, the shadow never lifted. Even if she outlasted the immediate storm, even if time softened the anger, her name would forever be linked to that chest. In the annals of history, she would not be remembered as the steady companion of Charles or the survivor of decades of scandal. She would be remembered as the queen consort whose bedroom wall concealed a chest that shook the monarchy to its core. The Clarence House discovery may have begun as a routine inspection, but it ended as a reckoning. A reckoning with secrecy, with legacy, with the very foundations of trust. The chest was opened, but in doing so, it opened something much larger: the public's demand for truth, their willingness to question, and their refusal to accept silence. The monarchy would never be quite the same again. And perhaps that was the true legacy of the chest. Not the papers inside, not the heirlooms it catalogued, but the shift it created in the minds of millions. A reminder that even behind the most polished walls, the past cannot be buried forever.